Hello and welcome to Mr. Mack-Poole's lesson today on why there was a power struggle and why did Stalin win. So this is the Russian Revolution and Dictatorship, and the board which we studied from is AQA and the module is 2N. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into this. So the success criteria today is that, one, by the end of this online lesson, you'll know why there was a power struggle. You understand the context behind it. You understand who the main figures in the power struggle were and the disagreements indicative to the power struggle. You will understand why Stalin won, and it was a compromise. It was a convincing victory indeed, a very convincing victory to Stalin, and you understand why, and also the consequences from this. Okay, so to put this into context, as to kind of why there was a power struggle. Lenin dies, in essence, and his death was actually caused by, I think, an assassination attempt by a social revolutionary, so a left-wing revolutionary who was an enemy of the Bolshevik government, who are also extremely left-wing, but you have these factional splits on the left. And she was very angry with Lenin, so Fanny Kaplan shot him. And although he survived that assassination attempt in the short term, the bullet was lodged in him, and I believe that the bullet led to some kind of blood poisoning, which led to some strokes, which he had. So he was in very poor health. Now, this gave Comrade Stalin a very good opportunity to cement a closer relationship with Lenin. And in essence, Stalin acted as a go-between between Lenin and the Bolshevik revolutionary government. Now, whilst this was very interesting and great for Lenin, it puts him at odds with Krupskaya. Now, Krupskaya was Lenin's wife. Lenin and Krupskaya had a massive argument, and this plays out very importantly later, because it almost upended Stalin's ambition to be leader in Lenin's last will and testament, which she ensured was published. Okay. Now, Lenin dies, and Stalin is in charge of his funeral. So he organizes the funeral. It again gives Stalin an appearance of continuity with Lenin by being a pallbearer and an organizer of Lenin's funeral. So we could argue that's strategic. There's also a conspiracy that Stalin gave Trotsky the incorrect date for the funeral, and therefore Trotsky wouldn't have been able to attend. But Trotsky was, there is a truism to that. But Trotsky was also recovering from influenza at the time, so he wasn't very well, and he wouldn't have attended for that reason. That is viewed to be quite a large mistake by modern historians, but Trotsky himself brushes it off and said it was of no great consequence. Okay, so let's elaborate. Let's go a little bit deeper, because there's a little bit more nuance around why there was a power struggle. It wasn't just Lenin's death per se which caused this. There's other broader causes. So obviously Lenin was a centralized figure of authority within the Bolshevik party, and this is because in his interpretation of Marxism, which is called Leninism Marxism, he had introduced this theory called vanguard theory. Now, vanguard means to protect. So Lenin wanted to ensure and protect that the revolution would happen, and protect it afterwards as well. So a vanguard is a dedicated small bunch of followers who will protect something, okay, in this case, the revolution. So Lenin believed that only by having a small band of ultra-dedicated revolutionaries could you cause a revolution. And this flew at odds with Mensheviks, who thought that a communist society would come about in more gradual, moderate moves, okay? Now, this centralization of power seems to be at odds with Lenin's all power to the Soviets, and the Soviets are just committees. So really a communist Marxist theory is that power, you wouldn't have a centralized power base, you'd have a raft of committees throughout a country, and they would decide what happens. It would be the working classes taking control of their own destiny. Now, Lenin also believed in something called the dictatorship of the proletariat, and that was after a revolution, in an immediate afterwards anyway, you'd need to have a centralized power group to protect the revolution from enemies from the outside, because a communist revolution would always be attacked by bourgeois and aristocratic elements and power bases from outside and inside the country. So, in essence, the Bolshevik Party was heavily centralized at the point of his death. So, in the power struggle, which was really from 1924 to 1929, upon his death, you had a very centralized group of individuals who had a lot of power. Now, added to why there's a power struggle is also the social economics. So, the Russian Empire had, which is ostensibly the USSR, had World War One from 1914 to 1917. And then when the Bolsheviks had their revolution and took power, there was a Russian Civil War from about 1918 to 1922. So what you've got is 3 + 4, 7 years of war, which had really ruined the economy of the USSR. And it had led to an NEP being adopted by Lenin. Now, NEP is basically capitalism light. It's allowing peasants to enjoy capitalist practices, which was, of course, at odds with the Bolsheviks, who were believers in communism. Okay, so you've got this desperate social economic situation, and a communist government who is against its better intentions adopting an NEP. All right, so you've got this quite brittle situation. So that's in the background, and that's ongoing as well, and that's causing tension and stress to these Bolshevik leaders. Okay, so who are the main candidates for the future leader? So what I've done here, I've organized the more minor candidates, because the big two are Trotsky and Stalin. Okay, the future leader, but these candidates are still of importance. And these first two, I'm not going to read out everything that's on this screen here. If you wish to, you can pause it and have a little read. But Zinoviev and Kamenev, they come as a pair, as a duo, and they're always loyal to one another and support one another. Okay, so these two men enter a troika, a triumvirate with Stalin to begin with, to oppose Trotsky, because Trotsky appears as an heir apparent. So these two men, they've got some things against them. Okay. Now, what goes against them was the fact that they had opposed Lenin at a famous meeting before the October Revolution, where Lenin was like, "Look, we have to make this revolution happen now. We have to organize it ourselves. If we just take the post office and the train station in Petrograd, we will have a revolution." They opposed this, and they lost the vote of that committee 10-2. So that was kind of always remembered against them. And Lenin actually put this in his last will and testament as well. Now, Zinoviev himself was a very good writer, speech maker, intellectual. Lev Kamenev less so, but still contributed to the theories of Marxism and interpretations of it. They're essentially kind of on the left of the party, I'd say. Now, Bukharin was extremely popular in the party, very popular with party members, but he was on the right of the party. He advocated for the NEP. He was someone that was more willing to have a slow development towards a communist system. Now, because of his willingness to accept the NEP, the New Economic Plan, which was essentially a capitalist system within a Soviet state, although he was popular, a lot of the rank and file didn't agree with this policy. So I put him at odds there. And Rykov and Trotsky are, again, moderates and people willing to accept a more programmatic, slow pace. Trotsky I especially like because he's of the proletarian class. Okay, and this is something that we're going to get to a little bit later. The division in the party, according to whether they were actually bourgeois intellectuals or proletarian and from working class background. Okay, so I'll move on. If you really want to read this information, as I said, I don't need to read this out loud. I've written it on there for that purpose, for you to pause. Okay, so you can get to know the background of these people to a more deeper level. And if you want to do your own research, I would commend you to do so. So the two main candidates for the leadership were, of course, Lev Davidovich Bronstein, better known as Trotsky, or Josip Vissarionovich Shugarveli, better known as Joseph Stalin. Okay, so these are the two main candidates for leadership, and let's go through these without further abandoned. Okay, so the two main candidates for leadership. So Trotsky. And Trotsky was indeed the heir apparent. He was seen to be the most able man in the party, and he certainly had organizational flair. You're looking at the man who was responsible for organizing the October Revolution on the ground, whilst Lenin said, look, it has to be now. Lenin put Trotsky in charge of the revolution, organizing affairs on the ground and making it happen. Now, it can be no mistake that Lenin would have had the good judgment to choose him to do this. He would have seen him as the most able person to do that. And it was a resounding success. Now, when the Soviet Union was under an existential threat from the White Army and opposition armies from other countries sending troops in, Trotsky was put in charge of the Red Army during the Civil War, and he did a very successful job there. There is a debate as to why he was so impactful and if he was in fact impactful, but let's just say even if he was a nominal figurehead, the Soviet Union won. Okay, so he's got these key victories on his side. Now, added to this was the fact that he was a prolific speechmaker, writer, theorist. He was very charismatic. He was a great speaker. Okay, so if you go online and you write the writings of Leon Trotsky, they are huge. So and there is a communist movement today which still describes itself as Trotskyite. Okay, and there are still movements which really hearken into this man. He had natural authority and self-belief, a very strong sense of confidence. Now, this actually kind of becomes his weakness. So, like many great men or many geniuses or intellectuals, he was perhaps too convinced of his own ability. He came across as arrogant, shall we say, and this hubris he had made him underestimate the power of his opponents, and especially Comrade Stalin. Okay, especially Stalin. Stalin was massively underestimated by Trotsky. Now that's Trotsky's weakness. Okay, there. So, and he made no serious attempt to build a support base amongst the rank and file of the party. Maybe he was just so arrogant that he thought, I'm clearly the most able man. Everyone will see this. I'll be the next leader. And again, that's having too much belief in one's own ego. Okay. Also, later down the line of the power struggle, he seemingly flip-flops by opposing Zinoviev and Kamenev before uniting with them in left opposition. So initially, Zinoviev and Kamenev ally with Stalin because they think that Trotsky's the major threat to be leader. Later on down the line, Zinoviev and Kamenev break away with Stalin and join with Trotsky to join the left opposition. This makes both him and them seem inconsistent, whilst Stalin appeared to be a moderate. So let's get to Uncle Joe. Let's get to Comrade Stalin, Joseph Stalin now. So one of the most important things about Stalin was that he held the crucial position of the general secretary of the Bolshevik Party when the bureaucracy side of the party was expanding. So he was able to amass a substantial loyal power base by appointing truly proletarian elements to these positions. Now, let me elaborate, okay? There were two classes in the party, okay? A bourgeois class who had turned against itself, essentially, their own bourgeois elements in the country to create a communist revolution. And then there were people who were genuinely from the proletarian class who had risen up to join this revolution and then become part of its governance. It's from this second class, this less intellectual, this more gritty working class that Stalin appointed into the party because he believed that he could control them a little bit more easily. Well, certainly they were very loyal to him. And, if you'd come from a very impoverished background and then you were in the government of your country and you've been placed in that by Stalin, you would, of course, feel very loyal to him. This is very, very important. This is crucial for his win. Okay. Also, Stalin was great at concealing his true intentions. Now, he's accused of being a mediocrity. I don't believe he was ever mediocre. You're talking about a bank robbing, kidnapper, ransoming, poetry award-winning revolutionary. He's just he's very, very interesting man. Is Joseph Stalin. And I've read a biography of his called Young Stalin, and it's by Montefiore. I'll definitely give that a read. Okay. He was careful to appear as a moderate with infighting, and this is one of his more intelligent moves. When he joined him in a troika in a triumvirate with Zinoviev and Kamenev, he let them do most of the attacking on Trotsky, and he even supported Trotsky at some points, to make himself look more moderate, and that he was opposing factionalism, whilst ostensibly still supporting them in most of their votes. Very intelligent move to appear moderate. Okay, and of course he placed himself close to Lenin before Lenin's death, which made him look like a continuity figure with Lenin. This would become massive in Stalin's cult of personality later when he became leader. Now, these weaknesses are really his strengths, okay? Apart from, well, this one certainly is. So most of his colleagues saw him as crude and violent. Remember, he came from a very impoverished background. He was a son of an alcoholic shoemaker in Georgia. So they thought him as crude. He was a bank robber. So they just saw him as overly simplistic. But also, this isn't really a weakness. They liked him. They called him, he had a nickname, Koba. So remember, the fact that he came from this peasant background, I don't know how much you know about Georgian or kind of Balkan culture, but it's quite welcoming, quite friendly, quite warm. So he had this, he could be quite charming in his own way, in a kind of working class way. Okay. Now, something that really he wasn't overly enthralled with was his minor role in the October Revolution, when Trotsky obviously took such a major role. I think he was genuinely jealous of Trotsky about that. And he was also massively criticized in Lenin's final testament. So his opponents knew that in reality, Lenin had turned against them. However, caveat, they didn't use it against him. And that was one of the major reasons for his success. So Lenin's last testament. Okay, so Stalin and Krupskaya, which was Lenin's wife, had this major argument. And, well, I'm just going to read this out, actually. So Comrade Stalin, having become Secretary General, has unlimited authority concentrated in his hands, and I'm not sure whether he will always be capable of using that authority with sufficient caution. Comrade Trotsky, on the other hand, as his struggle against the CC on the question of the People's Commissariat of Communications really proved, is distinguished by not only by his outstanding ability. He's personally perhaps the most capable man in the present CC, but he has, and that's the Communist Committee, by the way, and he has displayed excessive self-assurance and shown excessive preoccupation with the purely administrative side of the work. These two qualities of the two outstanding leaders of the present CC can inadvertently lead to a split. So this is quite prophetic of Lenin. He's saying, like, the two most outstanding leaders, Stalin and Trotsky, they could lead to a split in the party. And it still led to a split in communism today. There are still people that support Stalin, they call themselves tankies, and people that support Trotsky, they call themselves Trotskyites. Okay, so he was quite prophetic in saying that. So I shall not give any further praises of the personal qualities of other members of the CC. I shall just recall that the October episode with Zinoviev and Kamenev was, of course, no accident, but neither can the blame for it be laid upon them personally, any more than the non-Bolshevism can upon Trotsky. Speaking of the young members, I'd like to say a few words about Bukharin and Pyatkov. They are, in my opinion, the most outstanding figures amongst the young ones. And the following must be borne in mind about them. Bukharin is not only the most valuable and major figure of the party, he is also rightly considered the favourite of the whole party, but his theoretical views can be classified as fully Marxist only with great reserve. So Bukharin's willingness to accept the NEP means he's not truly Marxist, okay? So these are the criticisms which Lenin put out. Now, the thing is that, and also, sorry, this is added to. So I think this is after the argument with Krupskaya. So Lenin is too rude, and this defect, although quite tolerable in our midst and dealing amongst us communists, becomes intolerable in a Secretary General. This is why I suggest that the comrades think about a way of removing Stalin from that post and appointing another man instead, who is, in all other respects, differs from Comrade Stalin, in having only one advantage, namely that of being more tolerant, more loyal, more polite, more considerate to the comrades, less capricious, etc. This circumstance may appear to be a negligible detail, but I think from the standpoint of safeguards against a split And the standpoint I wrote about the above relationship between Stalin and Trotsky is not a minor detail, but it is a detail which can assume decisive importance. So, okay, now because Lenin had essentially criticized everyone in the party, this this final testament was actually suppressed. Okay, it was suppressed because Zinoviev and Kamenev and Trotsky were all embarrassed about its contents. Now, the person that deserved to be most embarrassed was Stalin, but because they were also egotistical and not willing to have these slights against them from the kind of prophet of communism, which was Lenin, this testament was suppressed by all of them, and it was agreed it would be suppressed, and it didn't go out to the wider party. So Stalin really got away with things here, and he was almost upended, but he wasn't. Crucially, he wasn't, because of the actions of other people when he took that opportunity. Okay. Now, moving on, okay, from the final testament, permanent revolution versus socialism in one country. Well, this is the major point of divergence. Now, Leon Trotsky and essentially communist theory really advocated that once one country became communist, that communism should be exported throughout the world. Now, it almost was. There were attempted revolutions in Germany with the Spartacist uprising, and in Hungary too, and actually elsewhere in Germany, you had the Bavarian Socialist Republic as well. Okay, but that was also put down. So these communist revolutions, which showed so much promise to spread throughout the world, they were crushed. And that didn't really go in line with Marxist theory. So moderates like Stalin believe that actually they should focus on solidifying socialism in one country before trying to export it throughout the world, whilst Trotsky was for the idea of permanent revolution to spread it all around the world. Now, this became a massive bone of contention, and Stalin really won this argument. Okay, so this was a major factor in Stalin's victory. And now you think about why this is. Well, you have to really take the socio-economic situation. The economy of the USSR was on its knees. They were adopting capitalist practices instead of instituting more communist ones. They were under attack from foreign powers. They really needed to solidify what they were doing and consolidate their revolution in the USSR before they exported communism as a major international system for the world. Okay. Now, Trotsky's hesitation. So Stalin was appearing very moderate and being very intelligent. So at a party congress, the 13th Party Congress in May 1924, Trotsky really could have used Lenin's last testament against Stalin, but he chose not to. I think that the reason he didn't do this is because he didn't want to appear like a factionalist splitter, and this was Stalin's main card, really. He was saying, look, I'm not attacking everyone. I don't want to split the whole party. I want something nice and moderate. Made him look very reasonable, especially to the rank and file communist members of the party who just wanted some stability and continuity in their party. So I can understand why Trotsky didn't go after the jugular. I can understand why Trotsky didn't attack Stalin, but effectively Trotsky loses this power struggle and Stalin wins. So this could be a key reason. Now, Zinoviev and Kamenev, this letter, which Zinoviev, which I've amended in 1924, shows that Stalin very early on didn't really respect these two. Okay, so you're letting Stalin make a mockery of us. You want facts? Allow me. The national question. Stalin makes all the appointments of the Central Committee instructors. The Comintern. Vladimir Lenin dedicated a good 10% of his time to it. Stalin just turns up, takes one quick look, and makes a decision. Bukharin and I are never asked about anything. Pravda, that's the communist newspaper of the Bolsheviks. This morning, Bukharin was told the entire editorial board of the paper has been sacked without him being asked. You can see that Stalin very quickly just made very obvious moves that he wanted to take power. Okay, people talk about the triumvirate, but in reality, there is only Stalin's dictatorship. You can see that Stalin was going above and beyond really what he should be doing, but people were unwilling to oppose him publicly. Okay. Now, once Stalin had removed Trotsky and Zinoviev and Kamenev from the party, his next person he needs to deal with was Bukharin. Okay, so by 1928, there was a triumvirate. Okay, so Bukharin and Stalin were kind of managing the country together. Now, this is where Stalin is opportunistic. Okay, he picks the right arguments with the right people at the right time. Okay, now he wants to focus on socialism on one country. Okay, he removes Trotsky and Zinoviev and Kamenev with those arguments, with that main argument. But by 1928, the rank and file of the Communist Party, once things have become a bit more solidified in the Soviet Union, they don't want to operate with this NEP anymore. So Stalin becomes very popular because he essentially wants to crash the kulak class, okay, who are the rich peasant class. And he wants to introduce what is known as the Great Turn, okay? So this is where he wants to get into centralized planning of the Soviet economy. This is where he wants to collectivize the countryside, essentially the peasantry, collectivize them, and instead of people having private farms, go for collectivization, collectivized farms with sovkhozes and kolkhozes, and also he wants to get into 5-year plans. So this is Stalin making himself very popular with the rank and file of the party, who wish to implement these truly communist reforms for the Soviet Union. And with this, he is able to overpower Bukharin, okay, and appear as the true winner of the power struggle. So, summing up, why did Stalin win the power struggle? Well, pun mum is how I remember this, okay? Pun mum. His position as general secretary, he could appoint yes men into important positions in the Communist Party. He was underestimated, massively underestimated by his opponents. He appeared less intelligent and cunning than he really was. Now, whether he did this purposefully, which I think he did, okay, or whether that was just their fault, I think Stalin was a very intelligent and cunning man. You're looking at a man that really shaped the history of the Soviet Union and the world, of his victory in the Great Patriotic War. He's an extremely, extremely important man, and I don't believe that he was unintelligent with his accomplishments there. And also his network. Okay, he made this massive network of loyal, dedicated followers within the party. He was Machiavellian. He was a great manipulator and schemer. Okay, he was really good at appearing moderate and less power hungry than he really was. He was an opportunist. Now, historians often deride opportunists, but did his opponents, these intellectual greats in the party, did they take their opportunities? Trotsky didn't at the party congress when he could have criticized Stalin. And he was a moderate. He let Zinoviev and Kamenev do the dirty work against Trotsky. So he has appeared as an anti-factionalist to the party members. He played this so well. He played this with skill. He played it with aplomb. And remember, he's up against really great, intelligent people. Okay, Trotsky was an intellectual great. Zinoviev was an intellectual great. These people that he defeats, and he does it seemingly so easily, this is genius. Okay, this is really someone who's a genius at being cunning. And yeah, that and the consequences. Well, sorry, just going to go back. So the Great Turn, the consequences are huge for the Kulak class. The consequences are huge later on. He purges the party of these members: Trotsky, Zinoviev, Bukharin, Rykov, and Tomsky. They're all purged from the party later on. His reforms are extremely radical and leads to hundreds of thousands of peasants dying, especially amongst the Kulak class. They're liquidated. So the consequences are actually huge for the Soviet Union, and effectively Stalin's able to build a cult of personality as a dictator for the Soviet Union and is in power from, you could say, 1928, 1929 to 1953 to his death. Okay, so the consequences are actually huge for the Soviet Union. Okay, and on that note, I'm going to I'm going to say goodbye. Goodbye. Arrivederci. See you later.